Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Mortally Khalood. My name is Khalood and welcome to my channel. So to get us started, I was in a conundrum. I was like, okay, so what do I want to talk about first? You are going to quickly realize that there are a lot of logistics and scheduling and ideas that go into YouTubing. And as someone who has a full-time profession, this is definitely going to be a bit more of an organic experience with me, and I hope you enjoy it. So, Bismillah, let's just kick this off. So, to get started, I have been thinking about things that I wanted to talk about, and the first thing that came to mind to me, which was really critical, was the idea of identity. And specifically, I thought back to this really great exercise that I performed. Feel free to grab some paper, or feel free to mentally do this with me. And it was around if you had to write all of your identities down and put them all on an index card, and then every single round, and there was about 5 index cards, 5 rounds, you had to pick one to drop. So when I performed this exercise, I had African American, a woman, a USC scholar, a Muslim. I can't remember what my fifth one was. And I remember as we went through and we had to make decisions about which identity was the most critical one to us, I kept putting down different ones. And the last 2 that remained in my hand towards the end was Muslim and African American. Now, it was a very difficult decision, but at the same time, one that came naturally and organically. And when the last round left, the only thing that I was holding was one card. And I'm pretty sure you can imagine what that card was. And the last card I held was that of Muslim. And I sat back and I thought about it. And I said, if I had to give up all other identities, that I no longer got to identify as a cisgender woman, that I no longer identified as an African American, if I had to hold on to only one, what would it be? And it was my spiritual identity. And it was the identity of being Muslim. And I stepped back and I thought about the fact that in that identity of being Muslim, I felt this strong sense of unity and connection to something that is broader and greater than myself. But then it made me step back to recognize the fact that very often within the Islamic communities and Muslim communities, and I will be speaking specifically from a Western perspective, so if your community is different and you live in the Muslim world, maybe you won't find some of this content to be applicable to you, and maybe something in the future will relate better with you. But I stepped back and I thought about how we in America as Muslim communities are so divided in certain levels. We have the Desi Masjid, we have the Arabi Masjid, we have the African American Masjid, and we have the immigrant African Masjid. So if you're a Gambian from Senegal or Gambia, we have a masjid that's exclusively for these people. And I thought about how polar opposite that was from my own experience of growing up in a melting pot, shall we say, of a masjid that had people from different cultural backgrounds, as well as so many converts. My parents are converts, and I never realized the privilege that came with that. The idea that I got this is a technical terminology, do not come for me in the comments, but the idea that I got an unbastardized version of Islam. An Islam that was only rooted in the idea of you are a Muslim and this is what we understand it to be. And this is how we practice it. And this is how we try to build empathy and build within you an ability to see humanity. And then 2009 dropped me in the middle of Los Angeles. I was such a fob when I first got here. I don't think the term fob is offensive unless you're directing at someone in a derogative terminology, but I personally know that I was a foreigner when I landed in this country. I felt so out of place, but I digress. We here in this country are divided in terms of how we build community and how we associate with one another. And it takes me to 2 things that I think are very important. One of them is the idea of izzah and karama, and this idea of like, where do we pull our dignity from? Do we think of ourselves as going, oh my God, mashallah, I'm Arabi. Like, oh my God, how I'm amazing, I'm Arab. Or yeah, I'm Desi, or I'm African. Is our tribal and our lineage heritage so much more important that we give it precedence over our faith identity? And in that same breath, it takes me to another thing that I think is very important for us to discuss. It's a challenging one for us within the Muslim community because we like to think of ourselves as examples to the world because Allah says in the Quran that I placed you as I hate this word in English. I placed you as vice surgeons. read the word here. I placed you as examples essentially for the world. Now let's fast forward into the reality of living as Muslim, right? So Allah says this about us. And then we go out into the world, and what do? We allow the fact that white supremacy, for anyone who's watching this that is not from America, I will link a definition of white supremacy, or not even not from America, because that was such a ethnocentric statement to make to begin with. But anyone who's not familiar with the term white supremacy, I'm just going to leave a definition for it in the box below. But the point of the matter is we live in a world that is built on a system and a framework of white supremacy. And we like to delude ourselves as Muslims as if this very system that oppresses multiple people across numerous countries, that as a result of colonization does not impact us. And that what we see in our culture is unimpacted and undiluted and uncorrupted by white supremacy. And what we have is just authentic culture. This is who we are. But the reality is that white supremacy doesn't just come by itself. It comes armed with another thing, and that is anti-Blackness. And that we'll find that within the Muslim community, what we do is we have this sense of kibr, this sense of arrogance, if we are closer in proximity to whiteness. And that doesn't just apply to people who are not Black. Black people have the same thing as well. Individuals who are Black that are colorist, you're exhibiting traits of white supremacy. Black Muslims who want to say that you're too dark, I can't marry you, you're exhibiting characteristics of white supremacy. Indians who might say, oh, she's too dark, or Kali, I can't marry her. This is an exhibit, this is you showing that white supremacy has penetrated your heart, that anti-Blackness has penetrated your heart. And the same thing can be said within the Arab world. I lived there for quite some time, and it was not unusual for someone to go, Wallah mahlaha mabyadha, shufi lonha. Like, look at her, how beautiful she is. Look how white she is. Look at her color. These are things that are not, we think about them in passing, or I don't want to be out in the sun too much, I'm gonna get too dark. We don't think about their deep-rooted realities of where they're coming from in our psyche. Or we dismiss them as going, it's just culture. But culture has depth to it. It has reason behind it. There's a why behind everything that we do. And I think that it is imperative upon us as Muslims, as people, hell, if you're not Muslim and you're watching this and you've seen this in your community, it's imperative upon all of us as human beings living in this world to recognize the fact that we have a responsibility, we have a duty to the world in order to eradicate these things within us that are more devil-like in tendency and are more detrimental to the success and the prosperity of all of mankind, to actually eradicate it within us. So going back to the origins of racism in Islam. So there are many khutbahs out there, many lectures done by really phenomenal teachers. I'll link a few that I've listened to below. I just think that they're informative, they're educational, and they're so profoundly informative with regards to the content and the meat that they provide. And one of them that I really loved was talking about something that I didn't even realize that there was a lecture on it. As a kid, I just thought everyone knew where racism came from. And for me, racism begins when when Iblis, Shaitan, the devil, refused to prostrate like a bow of respect, not prostration of worship, to Adam. And he told God that I'm better than him. You created me out of fire and you made him out of clay. This was the origin of us judging and basing superiority off of a physical attribute of our creation that we had no control over. So for me as a Muslim, as a lay Muslim here, I'm not a sheikh, I keep saying this. I'm not a student of knowledge and I'm not a sheikha, okay? Let me actually act like I can speak Arabic. Anyways, I personally feel that there's a diseased heart condition within the Muslim world. And because we ignore it and we label it as culture, we put layers upon it to lie to ourselves as if we are not at fault ourselves. And I say this knowing that I come from a culture. So my mom is from Belize and my dad's African American. It is not uncommon in Belize for someone to say, oh my God, look at her, she has clear skin. And I also say this as a Black woman who recognizes that there are many Black women who look at me and say that you yourself have a privilege of not being very dark or darker Though in reality, my sisters, I really admire the cocoa. I try to tan very often, mashallah, but still, side note, side note. Anyways, the point of the matter is this. We all have implicit biases within us. We all have things that we were taught to us as children that as adults we have to unlearn. And as Muslim believers, I think we even owe a bigger responsibility because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, except for the one who comes to Allah with a pure and clean heart, a sound heart. So when I think about that ayah, it scares me because I'm like, what does that mean for people who are walking around going, oh yeah, you know, I'm better than that black abid over there. I'm better than that black slave over there because they're too dark. Or I'm better than that person over there because her hair is like really afro-y. Or I'm better than that person over there because, oh, I'm lighter and they're darker. But what does that mean in terms of that type of illness within the heart? I pray that Allah overlooks these faults within us, but I also think that it is our responsibility to do what Umar bin Khattab mentioned, حاسب قبل أن يحاسب. Take yourself into account before Allah takes you into account. And the same thing applies to our hearts. As believers, we have to step back and recognize that our responsibilities aren't just for the ritual performed, the ritual elements that we do. The salat and the zakat and the siyam and like fasting and praying and giving charity and these acts are important. But recognize that they're there for a reason. Allah is making us do it not just because He needs any of this from us, but He knows it'll help to rectify our characters, to improve upon us. We all have the ability to be bigoted, ignorant individuals, and unless we start to act like lifeguards and protect our hearts, we are going to be guilty of the same thing. And as I talk to you, know that I come to you as your sister that is concerned for you in many areas outside of just, oh, I want to rant at this issue because I'm an African American person. No, profoundly, I think that it is important for us to deal with these issues. We have to deal with this. We have to work on this actively. And as I'm talking to you guys, I hope you realize that that's what I'm trying to express here. That it is important that you take meaningful, incremental steps every day to deal with these issues. So if someone is sitting at the table and they go, oh, you have good hair and you're from the African American community, turn around and be like, good hair is healthy hair. What do you mean by that? And start to question and challenge people around you that are doing things that you know in your soul are incorrect. Because I promise you what you will be doing is you will be building up the next generation and you will be having such a profound impact, like a drop in a pond, and it will ripple across your entire family and your community. Change doesn't happen by some huge, amazing leader. Change happens in your home and within yourself. And once you start to do that, I promise you we will live in a world that is radically changed. I pray that you find this content interesting, and inshallah, until my next video, stay woke, stay awesome, stay Muslim. Assalamu alaikum.